The sky was clear, the sun shining brightly, and the wind was gentle. Everything seemed peaceful on Earth. But that peace was about to be shattered. A small metallic object streaked across the sky, burning brightly as it plummeted toward the ground. It was a spacecraft, no larger than a small car, and inside it was a tiny alien girl. Her name was Lyra, and she was no more than 3 feet tall. Her skin was smooth, shimmering with an unnatural silver-blue glow, and her eyes were large, dark, and filled with confusion. Her long, delicate limbs twisted and turned in the crash as the ship spiraled out of control. Lyra tried to steer it, but the craft was damaged. The controls were no longer responding. Panic filled her chest as the ship came closer and closer to the ground. The crash was violent. The metal of the ship crumpled like paper, and the force of impact sent Lyra flying through the wreckage. She tumbled through the air, landing hard on the soft earth below. For a moment, everything was still. Lyra lay there, her body aching, her mind dizzy from the sudden impact. Her ship was in pieces, and she could see smoke rising from what remained of it. She was alone on a strange world, an unknown place. She had no idea where she was or how to survive. Slowly, Lyra picked herself up. Her heart raced in her chest as she looked around. The land around her was unfamiliar. The plants were strange, towering over her, their leaves shimmering under the sunlight. The air smelled different too, thick with something she couldn't name. Lyra's hands trembled, but she forced herself to stand. Her long, pointed ears twitched at every sound, listening for any sign of danger. She was terrified. She had been fleeing from a dangerous enemy, an enemy who would stop at nothing to capture her. They wanted her knowledge, her abilities, and they would do anything to get it. She had barely escaped them, crashing here in the hopes of finding safety. But the earth was nothing like what she had expected. The creatures she could see moving in the distance were large, huge, towering beings, walking on 2 legs, much taller than her. And there were so many of them. Fear flooded her system. She was alone, lost, and surrounded by beings that were twice, maybe 3 times her size. She had no idea what they wanted, but the very sight of them made her stomach twist with dread. She instinctively knew they were predators, that they were dangerous, but she couldn't figure out how. The thoughts swirled in her mind, her training kicking in. She had been taught that when faced with a new species, she should always assume the worst. What if they wanted her for their own gain? Her thoughts turned dark. What if they wanted to mate with her? Her people were often sought after by other species because of their advanced genetics. They were considered a prize, a valuable resource. Lyra's mind raced. She had heard of other species who abducted smaller beings for their own purposes, forced to mate with them or become their slaves. She could not let that happen. Her eyes darted around, seeking any escape route. Her legs were still weak from the crash, but she couldn't stay here. She had to move. She staggered to her feet and began to run. The forest was dense, but she didn't care. She needed to find shelter, somewhere safe to hide. She pushed through the thick underbrush, her small body moving swiftly, her heart pounding with every step. The sound of footsteps behind her startled her, and she spun around, her breath catching in her throat. 2 tall beings, humans, were walking toward her. They had seen her. They were following her. Her fear grew. She was sure of it now. They were coming to take her. The humans, however, were not running. They were walking slowly, cautiously, as if they were unsure how to approach her. One of them was carrying something in his hands, something that glowed faintly. She couldn't make out what it was, but she didn't care. The sight of the humans sent a jolt of panic through her. She took a step back, her hands raised defensively. "Stay away," she shouted in her native language, hoping they could understand. Her words were harsh and filled with fear, but the humans didn't seem to understand. They stopped and exchanged looks, clearly confused. She could see their faces. No, their eyes showed no malice. But Lyra was too terrified to trust them. She couldn't afford to let her guard down. Not now. Not ever. She turned and ran again, her feet barely touching the ground as she darted through the forest. The humans hesitated for a moment, then followed. They seemed to be moving cautiously, not with the intent to capture her, but with an odd curiosity. For a moment, Lyra wondered if they were truly dangerous, or if her fear had clouded her judgment. But the thought was fleeting. She couldn't trust them. Not yet. She had to keep running, keep moving. She would find a way to survive. She had to. Lyra's heart raced as her small legs carried her through the dense forest, her breath coming in short bursts. The humans were still following her, not with the frantic speed she had feared, but with a slow, deliberate pace. It was almost as if they were trying to understand her. The thought made her even more nervous. Her eyes darted around, searching for a place to hide. The trees were tall, their leaves thick and green, creating a canopy that blocked out much of the sunlight. It was a good place to vanish, if she could make it far enough. She glanced over her shoulder and saw the two humans again. They had stopped a few feet behind her, talking softly. One of them, a man with short brown hair and glasses, looked down at the ground as if studying the dirt. The other man, with dark hair and a taller frame, seemed to be scanning the area, his eyes flicking from tree to tree. They were not running after her, but they weren't going away either. Lyra's small chest tightened with anxiety. Her first thought was to keep running, to find shelter and wait for the humans to leave. But a strange feeling tugged at her. They were not chasing her in the way she expected predators to chase. They weren't yelling or moving with the purpose of catching her. They were waiting, watching her carefully, almost as if they were unsure what to do. The man with glasses raised his hand in a gentle motion, as if signaling to the other. Lyra stiffened, unsure of their next move. "It's okay," the man said in a calm voice, though Lyra didn't understand his words. His tone was soft, unthreatening. Lyra took another step back, her eyes wide. She had no idea what the words meant, but the sound seemed peaceful, gentle, not like the sharp, harsh commands she expected from predators. She couldn't let her guard down, though. No, she couldn't risk it. She'd heard stories of other creatures who used sweet words to lure smaller beings into traps. The man with glasses crouched down, slowly lowering his body to make himself smaller, more approachable. His face showed no anger, no hunger, just curiosity. "Hey, little one," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's okay. We won't hurt you." The words sounded kind, but they only made Lyra more suspicious. The humans didn't seem angry, but that only deepened her fear. What were they planning? Why didn't they just grab her? She wondered if they were trying to make her lower her guard before attacking. She could feel the weight of her fear pressing down on her chest. This was so confusing. The things she had been taught in her training, the warnings about other species, were clouding her judgment. It was hard to see clearly when fear was so strong. She couldn't stop herself from thinking about how much bigger the humans were, how much stronger they must be. They had to be the predators they seemed. Her eyes flicked to the side, spotting a large rock nearby. It wasn't far from a tree that seemed to have a large opening in the bark, maybe a hiding place. She considered running toward it, but the second man, the one with dark hair, stepped forward, holding something in his hands. It was a small, glowing object. Lyra's fear reached its peak. The light coming from the object almost looked like a trap, something to distract her before they captured her. But the man didn't approach her. Instead, he knelt, placing the glowing object on the ground. It was soft and warm, almost like the sun's warmth on a cool day. "Please, trust us," the man said, his voice low and calm. "We're here to help." Lyra shook her head, her breath shallow as she tried to control the panic threatening to take over. Help? How could they help her? She was certain they only wanted to use her for their own gain. They must have been waiting for this moment, watching her ship fall from the sky, knowing exactly what they would do once she landed. But why hadn't they attacked her yet? Why were they acting so strange? Her mind raced, torn between her survival instincts and the part of her that felt a strange, unfamiliar pull toward the humans' calm voices. They were not rushing toward her, not grabbing her, not trying to hurt her. They were only offering warmth. She hesitated, her legs trembling, but the pull of curiosity slowly began to override her fear. Lyra took a cautious step forward, her gaze flicking to the glowing object on the ground. It looked safe. If anything, it almost seemed like a gift. But she wasn't ready to trust yet. She'd been trained to avoid any situation where things seemed too good to be true. The man with glasses saw her hesitate, and he smiled gently. "Don't worry. We won't hurt you. We just want to help you," he said again, the words slow and kind. "We can understand you. We can help you get home." "Home," Lyra whispered, her voice shaking. Did they know where she came from? Could they truly understand her language? No, they must have been tricking her. But something in her gut told her to give them a chance, just this once. Slowly, she crouched down, her small body trembling, and reached out toward the glowing object. Her fingers brushed the warm surface, and for the first time since her crash, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, these humans weren't what she had feared. The glowing object in Lyra's hands was warm, almost soothing. She felt its gentle heat, but it did little to calm the storm of fear inside her. As her fingers wrapped around it, her heart beat faster, the same worries returning. What if this was a trap? What if they wanted her to touch it so they could control her? She had read about these kinds of tricks. Deceptive, kind gestures that masked darker intentions. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice behind her. The man with glasses spoke again. "You're safe," he said. His tone was comforting, but it only made Lyra more suspicious. "You can trust us. We don't want to hurt you. We only want to help." Lyra turned quickly, almost dropping the object in her hands. The man wasn't moving toward her, but his eyes were filled with something she couldn't quite understand. There was no hunger in them, no desire to capture her. They just seemed curious. The more she looked at him, the more she felt the tension in her chest grow. She wanted to run again. She needed to escape. Her eyes darted toward the forest. The trees, the rocks, the shadows, they all seemed like places where she could hide and make her escape. But where would she go? She was still injured from the crash, and her energy was quickly fading. She couldn't outrun them forever. Her body needed rest, and yet she felt like she couldn't trust the humans enough to give in to that need. She stood there for a long moment, torn between her fear and her exhaustion. Every instinct in her screamed to keep moving, to run away from the humans who seemed so calm, yet so strange. But in the back of her mind, she could hear the voice of her teacher, the one who had trained her to be strong in the face of fear. Not all species are enemies. Some seek peace. Could these humans be those peaceful species? Before Lyra could decide what to do next, the second man, the taller one with dark hair, spoke for the first time. His voice was deep and steady, the kind of voice that could make anyone feel safe. "We understand you're afraid," he said. "We would be too, in your position." His words felt genuine, like he truly understood her fear. He took a small step forward, but still at a distance, not wanting to make her feel cornered. Lyra's mind raced. Do they really understand? She wanted to believe them. She wanted to trust that they didn't want anything from her. But her training told her to be careful, to never let her guard down with beings she didn't understand. Her kind had suffered before from trusting too easily. She couldn't make that mistake again. The man with glasses stepped closer to her, still holding his hands out in a peaceful gesture. "Please," he said, his voice low and warm. "We only want to talk. No harm will come to you here." Lyra stood frozen, staring at the man. She couldn't understand what was happening. Why were they being so kind? Why hadn't they tried to take her yet, like she had expected? She knew she couldn't just run away without understanding them first. If she did, she might never have the chance to learn about them. and they might never learn about her. The glowing object in her hands began to pulse softly, almost as if it was alive. She couldn't help but look at it. The soft light it gave off felt strangely comforting. It wasn't the cold, harsh glow of a weapon. It felt peaceful. Slowly, almost hesitantly, she lifted her gaze back to the humans. They were waiting patiently, their eyes soft and kind, with no trace of aggression. Something inside her shifted, just a little. She didn't lower her guard completely, but she stepped forward slightly. Her feet moved slowly, unsure, but she wanted to know more. The man with dark hair noticed the change. "Thank you," he said softly. "We just want to make sure you're okay." Lyra's mind was still in turmoil, torn between the lessons of caution and the curiosity she felt. Could these humans really be different? Were they truly not like the creatures who had hunted her kind in the past? The man with glasses smiled, still careful not to make any sudden movements. "We've studied your kind," he said, but Lyra's heart skipped a beat. The words "study your kind" sent a wave of fear through her again. Had they known about her all along? She shook her head, trying to push away the thought. They couldn't have known everything. She had only just arrived on their planet. "I'm not like them," Lyra whispered, mostly to herself. I don't want to be hurt." The man nodded slowly, understanding her fears. "We understand. You're not a prisoner here," he said gently. "You're free to go if you want, but we want to help you." Lyra took a deep breath, her hands tightening around the glowing object in her palm. Her instincts told her to run, but another part of her, the part that still held a sliver of hope, urged her to stay. What if they really do want to help? What if they're not like the others? But even as she thought that, the fear inside her remained. She couldn't completely ignore it. She would need more time. Time to decide whether she could trust them. Time to figure out if these humans really were who they said they were. The air was thick with tension as Lyra stood facing the two humans. They had been patient with her, waiting quietly as she struggled with her fear and confusion. But the more she thought about their words, the more questions filled her mind. Why were they being so kind? Why hadn't they tried to take her yet? As she had feared. They must know something about her, or about her people. But Lyra couldn't figure it out. The more she tried to understand, the more her mind grew tangled in a web of doubt and fear. She glanced back at the man with glasses. His gentle eyes were still focused on her, and he had not moved any closer. He seemed to sense her unease, but instead of rushing her, he just waited. The other man, the one with dark hair and a taller frame, stepped forward again, but this time much more slowly. He didn't speak, only watched her with those kind, soft eyes. Lyra instinctively took a small step back, though she was too exhausted to move quickly. Her body still ached from the crash, and the world around her felt hazy. She needed rest, but she couldn't trust these humans enough to sleep, not yet. The taller man held out a small pack from his waist and set it gently on the ground between them. "We have food and water," he said. "You must be thirsty, and I know you're scared. We just want to help." Lyra's stomach growled softly at the mention of food, but she quickly pushed the thought aside. She couldn't focus on that right now. There was something about the way they acted, so different from the way predators had approached her in the past. They weren't rushing toward her with intent to harm. They weren't using force to get her to obey. In fact, they were doing the opposite. They were giving her space, allowing her to make her own decisions. Lyra hesitated, looking at the pack on the ground. Her hand still gripped the glowing object tightly, unsure of what to do next. Her body was weak from the crash, and her mind was spinning with all the possibilities of what could happen if she made the wrong choice. Then the man with glasses spoke again, his voice soft and gentle, like a soothing lullaby. "You don't have to be afraid. We won't hurt you. You're safe here." The words felt real. Lyra's heart beat faster, but she felt a small flicker of something, hope. Was it possible that they weren't trying to trick her? Could they truly be as kind as they seemed? She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Slowly, she lowered the glowing object, still unsure, but her fingers no longer felt quite as tight around it. Her gaze shifted from the pack to the two men. They had not moved any closer. They were still giving her space. The man with glasses continued to speak, his tone calm and reassuring. "We understand you're from another world. We've seen your ship crash. We know you must be afraid, but we're here to help. We want to understand your kind, and we'll protect you." Lyra's mind raced. Protect me? Could they really protect her from the dangers that awaited her? She had no idea who these humans were, or if they could truly keep her safe. She had always been taught to trust no one, not unless they were from her own species. But here, in the forest, in this strange world, there were no familiar faces, only these two humans who seemed strangely trustworthy. The other man, the tall one, didn't speak this time. Instead, he just watched her, his expression still calm and understanding. There was something about the way he looked at her, no malice, no judgment, just quiet patience. He wasn't demanding anything from her. It felt different. Lyra felt a strange tug in her chest, something pulling her to them. She had been alone for so long, alone in her fear, alone in her escape. But now, for the first time, there was a flicker of something else, something warm and reassuring. She slowly knelt down next to the pack, her movements hesitant but steady. She opened it carefully, still unsure of what to expect. Inside, there were several bottles of water and some food wrapped in a simple cloth. It looked normal. Nothing about it seemed dangerous. The smell of the food even made her stomach rumble more loudly. The man with glasses smiled when he saw her take the food. "It's all safe," he said. "It's what we eat. You can trust us." Lyra nodded, not sure if she could fully trust him, but too hungry and tired to argue. She took a small bite, then another. The food wasn't much, just a simple energy bar, but it was enough to fill the emptiness inside her, if only for a moment. As she ate, she began to relax, just a little. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She felt a slight ease in her chest, a slight relief from the constant tension that had been building since her crash. The man with glasses watched her quietly, his expression soft but filled with concern. "We're not the enemy," he said gently. "We're just here to help." Lyra looked up at him, the words sinking in. They're not the enemy. Her mind finally started to slow down. Maybe these humans weren't like the others she had encountered. Maybe they didn't want to hurt her. Maybe, for once, she didn't have to fight. She could rest, maybe even trust them, just a little bit. "Thank you," Lyra whispered, barely above a whisper. She wasn't sure what she was thanking them for. Maybe for the food, maybe for their patience, or maybe for giving her a chance to breathe. The man with glasses smiled again, but this time there was a warmth to it, a real kindness. "You're welcome," he said. For the first time since her crash, Lyra allowed herself to relax, just for a moment. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone after all. Lyra sat on the ground, her small hands still clutching the half-eaten energy bar. Her mind was filled with confusion, but there was also something new, something unfamiliar. A sense of peace. She hadn't felt it in so long, not since before her crash. These humans, despite their size and their strange ways, had shown her nothing but kindness. They hadn't tried to capture her or harm her. They had given her food and water when she was hungry and thirsty, and they hadn't asked for anything in return. Still, something deep inside her told her to be cautious. She had been trained to always be alert, always prepared to protect herself. Trust was a dangerous thing, especially when you didn't know who the other person was or what they wanted. Lyra couldn't forget the lessons she had learned, the lessons that had kept her safe through the countless dangers of space. She couldn't just ignore the fact that she was alone, stranded on a strange planet with two humans who could be lying to her. But she also couldn't ignore the feeling in her chest, the sense of warmth that had begun to grow as she spent more time with them, the patience they had shown, the way they hadn't pushed her to do anything. They hadn't taken advantage of her weakness or tried to control her. The man with glasses sat a few feet away, watching her quietly. He didn't press her for anything. He simply waited, as if giving her the time she needed to make a decision. The other man, the taller one, had stepped back and was standing near the trees, his eyes scanning the area. Lyra realized that they weren't just waiting for her to trust them. They were also keeping watch. They were protecting her. She felt a sudden pang of guilt. They had offered her everything: food, safety, kindness, and here she was, questioning their motives. Could they really be trying to help her? Or were they just playing some long, complicated game? "What do you want from me?" Lyra finally asked, her voice trembling with the weight of the question. "Why are you helping me? What do you want?" The man with glasses met her gaze, his expression soft but serious. "We don't want anything from you," he said. "We just want to help. We want to understand who you are and where you come from. We've never met anyone like you before." Lyra's brow furrowed. "You've never met anyone like me. How do you know I'm not a threat?" The man smiled gently. "You don't seem like a threat. But even if you were, we would still try to help. That's what we do. We believe in helping others, even if it's risky." Lyra took a deep breath, considering his words. She couldn't deny the truth in them. They had acted out of nothing but kindness so far, and they hadn't shown any sign of aggression. Still, it was hard to let go of the fear that had been a constant part of her life. She had always assumed that the universe was a dangerous place, full of creatures who would try to use her, trap her, or harm her. But these humans were different. They weren't like anything she had known before. The taller man finally spoke, his voice calm but filled with quiet confidence. "We know that trust takes time," he said, "but you don't have to be afraid of us. We're not your enemy. If you want to stay here, we'll protect you. If you want to leave, we won't stop you." Lyra looked at them both, feeling the weight of their words settle on her. Leave? She had considered running before, but now, the idea of leaving felt strange. She had nowhere to go. She didn't even know where she was. These humans had shown her kindness, and they were offering her safety. They had given her a place to rest, a chance to heal. She hadn't felt safe in so long. For the first time since the crash, she wondered if she could allow herself to trust them, just a little. She stood up slowly, her legs shaky but determined. The decision weighed on her heavily. She had never been one to give up control, to rely on others. But maybe, just maybe, these humans were different. They weren't asking her to give up control. They were offering her a chance to heal, to rest, and to learn. I don't know if I can trust you completely," Lyra said, her voice small but steady. "But I'm willing to stay. For now." The man with glasses nodded, his expression warm. "That's all we ask. Take your time. We're not going anywhere." Lyra nodded in return, but as she looked at them, she couldn't shake the feeling that her choice was bigger than just staying with them for the night. She had a choice to make, not just about whether to trust them, but about what kind of future she wanted. Could she truly live in peace with these humans? Could she let go of the constant fear, the need to always be on guard? It was hard to say. But for now, the idea of staying, of letting herself heal, felt like the only choice that made sense. As the day slowly turned to night, Lyra sat down near the campfire they had made. The warmth from the fire felt comforting, and the stars above twinkled brightly in the sky. She knew the journey ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, she felt like she might not be alone. Maybe, just maybe, the humans weren't the enemy. Maybe they were something more, something she had never dared to believe in. The night grew quiet, and for the first time since her crash, Lyra closed her eyes, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. Whatever happened, she would face it with strength, and perhaps with a little bit of trust. The next morning, Lyra woke to the soft sounds of birds calling in the trees and the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. It felt like a dream. The warmth of the campfire was still in the air, but the night had passed quietly, without any danger. She opened her eyes slowly, her mind still trying to process the strange sense of peace that had settled over her. The humans had kept their distance, just as they had promised. And now, as the sun rose higher in the sky, they were already preparing for the day ahead. The taller man with dark hair was gathering some supplies, while the man with glasses was studying the strange device Lyra had kept close to her. It still glowed faintly in her hand, its light a constant reminder of where she was from and the uncertainty that still filled her thoughts. She sat up, stretching her arms above her head, trying to shake off the stiffness in her muscles. The crash had taken a toll on her, but the rest she had gotten last night had helped. Slowly, she rose to her feet, her legs a little wobbly but steadier than they had been before. The man with glasses noticed her moving and turned his attention toward her. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm. "How are you feeling?" Lyra hesitated for a moment before answering. "Better," she said quietly. "Still tired, but better." He smiled and nodded. "That's good. You've been through a lot. Take your time." Lyra glanced around the camp, taking in the quiet forest that surrounded them. There were no signs of danger, no sudden movements in the shadows. The place felt safe. She had no idea where she was or what this planet was like, but for now she could breathe. For now she could rest. The taller man finished packing up their supplies and walked over to her. "We're heading to a nearby town today," he said. "We can't stay here forever. It's not safe in the open like this, but we'll keep you with us. You don't have to worry." Lyra felt a flutter of anxiety at the mention of a town. She didn't know what to expect. What kind of people lived here? Would they be like the humans who had found her, or would they be different? Dangerous? "I don't know," she said, her voice tight with hesitation. "I don't know if I'm ready." The man with dark hair gave her a reassuring look. "We'll be careful. We've been to this town before. It's safe. You'll be fine." Lyra looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of deceit. She found none. It was strange. The way they spoke, the way they acted, like they really wanted to help her. She had never met anyone like them before, and it made her feel both hopeful and unsure. "What if I can't trust them?" she asked quietly, her voice filled with doubt. "What if the people there are like the ones I've run from?" The man with glasses approached her, his expression kind but firm. "That's a good question," he said. "But we'll be with you. If anything goes wrong, we'll protect you." Lyra swallowed hard. It was hard to admit, but a small part of her believed them. For the first time since the crash, she felt like maybe she wasn't completely alone in this strange world. "Okay," she said after a long pause. "I'll go, but only because I don't have anywhere else to go." The taller man smiled, his eyes bright with understanding. "That's all we ask. Just trust us, and we'll get you through this." Lyra nodded, though a knot of fear still twisted in her stomach. The decision had been made, but it didn't feel final. She was still so unsure. She had no idea what to expect, what dangers lay ahead. But for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was completely powerless. These humans had given her a chance to rest, to heal, and now they were offering her something more, an opportunity to see what else this world had to offer. She followed them as they packed up the last of their supplies, the weight of her decision pressing on her shoulders. The unknown stretched ahead of her, and though her fear still lingered, it no longer ruled her actions. She was moving forward, with the hope that maybe, just maybe, the humans were right. Maybe they could offer her a place to belong, a place where she didn't have to constantly run or hide. As they walked through the forest, Lyra couldn't help but feel a sense of curiosity rising within her. What would this town be like? Who would she meet there? For the first time, she was allowing herself to wonder if there might be something good waiting for her, a future that wasn't filled with fear or flight, a future where she could be safe, maybe even happy. The journey through the woods was quiet, the only sounds coming from their footsteps and the distant calls of birds. Lyra stayed close to the humans, though she couldn't help but glance around every now and then, as though expecting danger to leap out at her from the shadows. But as the minutes passed, and they continued walking, nothing happened. There were no attacks, no ambushes, just the peaceful rhythm of the forest around them. After what felt like hours, the trees began to thin, and the sounds of the forest were replaced by the distant murmur of voices and the bustle of life. Lyra felt a knot of tension form in her stomach as they approached the edge of the woods. The town was just ahead. The two humans stopped and turned to face her. "This is it," the taller man said. "We'll take it slow, okay? We're with you." Lyra nodded slowly, her heart racing. She couldn't turn back now. She had made her choice. She stepped forward, toward the unknown. The town slowly came into view as Lyra walked alongside the two humans. The trees thinned out, and the sounds of the forest gave way to the soft hum of life. She could hear voices, the clatter of carts, and the distant clanging of metal. As they approached the town's edge, Lyra's heart began to race once more. The peaceful feeling she had in the forest was slowly replaced by a knot of anxiety in her stomach. What would she find here? Who were these people? The humans were calm beside her, their presence a steady anchor. The man with glasses glanced at her, offering a reassuring smile. "You're doing great," he said. "Just take it one step at a time." Lyra nodded, though her thoughts were still a whirlwind of uncertainty. She had never trusted anyone like this before, certainly not strangers. But these humans, as strange as they were, had been nothing but kind. She had to believe that they were on her side. As they walked toward the town gates, Lyra couldn't help but notice the buildings, small homes made of wood and stone, with smoke rising from chimneys and windows that were open to the sunlight. People were moving about, going on with their day, carrying baskets or speaking to one another. It was a small, peaceful town, unlike any place she had seen on her travels. The tall man turned to her, his expression soft but serious. "This is where we live, or at least close by. It's a quiet town, and it's safe. We've helped them before, and they've always been good to us." Lyra looked up at him, her eyes filled with questions. "How do you know they're safe? What if they're like the others I've met?" The man nodded thoughtfully. "I understand your fear, but not everyone is like the ones you've encountered before. Trust takes time, and we're here with you. You're not alone in this." The words were simple, but they carried a weight of sincerity. Lyra wasn't sure if she could ever truly let go of her fear, but for the first time, she wanted to try. She wanted to believe that there could be a place for her here, a place where she didn't have to keep running, a place where she could rest, and maybe even heal. As they passed through the gates, the townspeople looked up, their eyes curious but not hostile. Lyra felt their gaze on her, but she kept her head down, trying to avoid drawing attention. The man with glasses and the tall man kept a steady pace, walking beside her, making sure she felt secure. They didn't stop immediately, but continued through the town, passing by shops and homes. The people here didn't look threatening. In fact, many of them smiled as they saw the humans, nodding in greeting. Some waved, others were too busy with their own tasks to pay much attention. It felt like a normal town, the kind of place she had only heard about in stories. After a few more moments, they came to a small building near the edge of the town. It was modest, with a thatched roof and wooden walls, but it looked warm and welcoming. The tall man stopped in front of it and turned to Lyra. "This is where we stay," he said, his voice gentle. "It's a safe place. You can rest here, and we'll keep you safe." Lyra hesitated, staring at the building. It was simple, but it looked peaceful. She took a deep breath, feeling a small wave of relief wash over her. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. A place where she didn't have to hide. A place where she could heal. As they entered the building, Lyra was greeted by a soft, warm light inside. There were cushions on the floor, a small table with food set out, and a fireplace crackling in the corner. It smelled of herbs and wood, and the air was cool but comfortable. For the first time in a long while, Lyra felt a sense of calm settle over her. She stepped inside, looking around as the two humans followed her in. "Sit down, get comfortable," the man with glasses said. "We'll make sure you're settled in." Lyra nodded silently, moving toward the cushions near the fireplace. She sat down carefully, still cautious but allowing herself to relax just a little. The tall man took a seat across from her, and the man with glasses began unpacking the supplies they had brought with them. There was food, blankets, and other simple necessities. They had thought of everything. "We'll stay here for a few days," the tall man said, looking at Lyra. "Give you time to adjust, time to rest. We'll help you in any way we can." Lyra looked at them, her eyes softening. She had spent so long alone, so long fighting to survive, that the thought of not having to fight anymore felt strange. She had never allowed herself to imagine this kind of peace, but now, with the humans here offering her comfort, safety, and care, the idea seemed real, possible even. "What happens next?" she asked quietly. "What do I do now?" The man with glasses smiled gently. "You take things one day at a time. There's no rush. You don't have to decide everything today." Lyra nodded, feeling a flicker of hope deep inside her. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't know what the future would hold. But for the first time, she felt like maybe she could belong somewhere. Maybe this was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where she didn't have to fight to survive. A chapter where she could find peace, and maybe even trust again. As the fire crackled in the corner, Lyra sat quietly, her eyes focused on the warmth it offered. The world outside was still uncertain. But here, in this simple little building, with these two humans who had shown her kindness, she felt something new. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, she was no longer alone.